My name is Aaron Rodriguez. I'm the head of development here at XOR, and I'll be walking you through an overview and demonstration of the platform that we've developed to help us help companies share data where they're the ones who control who can access their data and how that data can be used. Now, there are many ways you can go about doing this, and data sharing can take on many different forms. But what I'll be going through is how you can use our platform to set up a collaborative data exchange, one where you have multiple companies agreeing to collaborate together to share the same data to solve a business problem that they all might have. So since this is a demonstration, let's come up with a business problem. And let's go with something we're familiar with. Let's say there are hotels and they're facing a problem where certain guests are going around to different hotels and throwing these wild, extravagant parties and causing lots of damage to rooms. It's a really big problem for the hotels. And maybe they've tried their own in-house methods to mitigate it, but whatever they're doing, they're just not catching enough people. And let's say some hotel managers are at a conference and they recognize that, whoa, they all have this problem. And they all see these guests are coming in, causing this damage, and their deposits just aren't covering it. So they agree that one of the ways they can mitigate this is to share information about these guests that are causing this excessive damage so that the next room that these guests go to reserve, the hotel can make sure that they have an appropriate deposit or credit card authorization amount. And that's our scenario. So let's use our platform to solve this problem. So first thing we got to do is go ahead and log in. So we're logging in and here we are. You can see we have no exchanges set up. We actually have nothing configured. I haven't pre-configured anything in the platform. We're starting completely empty. We're starting from scratch. So the first thing we got to do is add our participants or members as they're called on the platform. So we can go here to members and click on new member. And let's say we're going to have a few participants, and let's say that Hilton is going to participate. And let's say we have Marriott. And let's go with somebody that's not directly in the hotel industry. Let's go with Airbnb. So while they're not directly in the hotel industry, maybe they're having the same problem. All right? So now that we have our 3 members configured, we need to next go ahead and configure the industry that each of them are part of. Now, we'll be using these industries later when we're setting up permissions about who can access their data and how it's going to be used. But to get our industries configured, we can go in here and go into industries, click add new industry. Let's add hotel for the hotels, and let's add room share for Airbnb. Great, so we got our 2 industries assigned, or at least created, and now we need to assign them to our members. So to do that, we go in here to members, we can go to Airbnb, and we need to go into portfolios. Now, portfolios help members better label their data, which is particularly useful for these large companies that operate in different geographic regions and need to manage their data separately, or maybe they actually operate in different industries completely. But for now, for our example, we're just going to create one portfolio for each member, and each member is going to be associated with one industry. So we're going to create a portfolio for Airbnb. We're going to create their room share portfolio that's in the room share industry. Makes sense? Now we can go back into Hilton and go to their portfolios and add them in, create a hotel portfolio for them in the hotel industry. And then we can go to Marriott and go into their portfolios, go to hotel, and hotel. All right. So now that we have our members created, we have each member has a portfolio and an industry assigned, we're ready to define the data that they're going to share to mitigate the damage caused by these bad guests. So to do that, we're going to go into data sources and click new data source. And we need to give it a name. So let's call it the room records data source. I know I'm very, very clever. All right, we can go ahead and click create, and there we are. So data sources define the underlying data that is going to be used in an exchange. It provides an API that data owners can use to create, fetch, update, and delete their own data within that data source. So for our room records data source, before the members can use it, we first need to configure it. So we can go in here and we need to define what fields are going to be in this data source. So for our data source, we're going to go ahead and let's do email, and let's say that that's encrypted. Let's say we'll do the name of the guest, and that's encrypted. And let's do the date of stay, and let's do loss amount. Okay, so we got our 4 fields there. And next we need to define the access methods, so how this data is going to be accessed. If you're familiar with databases, this is similar to like creating an index on a table. So we're going to create our email access method. It's going to be using email. And then we need to actually assign our members so that each of these members can go ahead and access their API. But then the last thing we got to do is we actually have to deploy it. And great, that is deployed and we are live. So now these are 3 members can access this URL to manage their data. And I'm going to jump into Postman to help us make these API requests. All right, here we are in Postman. You can see I've got a request already loaded up, and we're going to be putting some data into our room records data source. So you can see here I'm running an HTTP post. You can see the URL. This is their API key. I'm actually going to be loading data as Hilton. So Hilton needs to provide their member ID, needs to provide their portfolio ID. They also need to provide their own member record ID. So this is used for their own internal tracking. It's up to the members to put their own record IDs on things. And then the actual data. So you can see here, Aaron Rodriguez stayed at Hilton on August 1st, 2017. My email address, and apparently I caused $3,000 worth of damage. I had an amazing time, allegedly. But anyway, we can go ahead and insert this into our data source. We can go ahead and post it. And you can see here we get the record echoed back to us, but we get a few extra fields along the way. So we get our inserted timestamp. We can see when the data was loaded. We can see when it was updated. And we can see there actually the platform assigns its own internal record ID, which is different than what the member provided. So this is what the platform assigned. But again, we haven't enabled data sharing yet, but we have enabled the members' ability to fetch, insert, update, delete their own data. So, but to get data sharing enabled, we need to make this data source a part of an actual exchange. So to do that, we need to jump back into the platform. All right, so here we are back in the platform. And to enable data sharing, we need to create our exchange. And we can go and click on exchanges, and we can create new exchange. And let's do our room records exchange. We'll click create. And let's go ahead and configure it. Now, to configure our exchange, we'll need to first create queries. Now, queries define the inputs and outputs for asking question of the exchange. But before we can do that, we need to add our purposes. And much like industries, purposes are going to be used when we're looking at permissions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and add our purposes. So let's go ahead and add, let's just add loss prevention as our purpose. Okay, so we're just gonna have one purpose here. And actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and create another one. Let's go ahead and create marketing as a second purpose. We're not going to do any marketing queries, but let's go ahead and add a second one. All right. So we're going to go back into our exchanges and go back into configure. And now that we have a purpose set up, we can go ahead and create our queries. So let's go ahead and click create queries. We're going to do it by email, query. We're going to create, we're going to do it for loss prevention. We're going to do our room records data source. Let's do an email as our input, and let's say let's return the data stay, the loss amount, and the name. All right, so we can go ahead and create that. And then we need to add in our members. All right, great. So we just created our exchange and added our members to it. So now the member, we can go back to the query here. So now our 3 members can use this URL to actually submit requests. So again, I'm going to jump back into Postman, and let's go ahead and actually make some queries against this exchange. Okay, here we are back in Postman, and we've got an actual request ready to run. This request is for Airbnb, so it's now Airbnb's API key and Airbnb's member ID and portfolio ID. And these are all different from the Hilton that we used to load data earlier. But let's go ahead and submit our request. You can see here I'm going to be querying for Aaron Rodriguez. So let's go ahead and post this. And sure enough, we get a response. You can see here's the XOR request ID that uniquely tracks this record, and we get 1 record back. We can see Aaron Rodriguez, sure enough, stayed somewhere on August 1st, 2017, and kind of caused $3,000 worth of damage. I don't have where I stayed, but I know that I did cause some damage. And then I have a masked record ID that uniquely defines this record. So we just enabled data sharing. We just had Airbnb access Hilton's data just as they were supposed to. Airbnb hasn't loaded any data yet, but you can imagine they could. But one of the features of our platform is that now that somebody else accessed Hilton's data, Hilton should get notified that somebody is using their information. This is a way that keeps the platform honest about giving transparency about who's accessing their information. So let's jump back into the platform and let's go ahead and take a look. So here we are back in the platform. We can go into Hilton's member, and we can go actually click here in their notifications. And sure enough, we see that one of the records was accessed. The Hilton 1 record in the room records data source was accessed for the purpose of loss prevention, and the person that accessed it was in the room share industry, and you can see here when they accessed it. Notice we didn't disclose any information about who specifically accessed this information. We do this to prevent leaking competitive information about who is accessing the data. Behind the scenes, the platform tracks it all in much more detail, but it doesn't disclose that level of information to the data owner. So if you go into details here, you can see, sure enough, we're not disclosing exactly who it is, just the industry that they're doing. Great, so we've made a request, and we've seen at the audit trail that that request can leave behind, but let's go ahead and take a look at permissions. So in permissions, we can go back in here, and so here we are in Hilton's permissions, and we can see that we can set up permissions for each data source and each industry and purpose that's involved. And if you click here, we actually offer 3 permissions. You can allow, deny, or there's a third permission called give to get. Now, what give to get will do is allow other members to access Hilton's data if Hilton is also granted reciprocal access to their data. So in our example, if everything is set to give to get, Airbnb effectively gives access to Hilton if Hilton gives access to Airbnb, and vice versa. So the net of it all is Airbnb and Hilton are actually able to access each other's data. And this give to get is actually the default permission of the platform. But let's go ahead and try changing it. So let's say that Airbnb wants to deny access to the hotel industry to their data. So we're actually going to set this to not deny and click save. But because now Airbnb has set their permission to deny for people in the hotel industry for the purpose of loss prevention, but Hilton has their permission still set to give to get, Airbnb has effectively denied themselves access to Hilton's data. So let's go back to our request and try it out. So we'll go back to Postman. Okay, so here we are back in Postman. You can see this is our previous request and response, same as before. But let's go ahead and change this request ID. And again, Airbnb has denied access to Hilton. Hilton has their permission set to give to get. So if we make this request, let's see what happens. And sure enough, we get no responses. Again, because Airbnb, by denying permission to Hilton, has effectively denied themselves access to Hilton's data. But there is a way to override this. So if we go back into the platform, we can actually have, let's say that Hilton wants to be benevolent. And Hilton wants to go and say that, they want to say people in the room share industry, you know what, they're just going to get full access to this data no matter what, for whatever purpose. So we can go ahead and click save. And let's go ahead and jump back. And now we can run that Airbnb request again. So we're now going to run the same request. Airbnb has basically everybody in the hotel industry denied. Hilton is benevolent and still says, you know what, you can still access my data. So now let's go ahead and see what happens. So we can click here and send that. And sure enough, we get our response back because Hilton wanted to still say, you know what, you can go ahead and access my data Airbnb. And that's it. So if you go back into our notifications, you should see, sure enough, there was a second notification generated. But there weren't 3 notifications because our second request returned no data and effectively then would have no notification. So if we go ahead and click this one here, you can see this was for our third request. There you go. There's a later timestamp. All right. And that's basically the core of our platform. We basically set up an entire data exchange that could be live from scratch in about 10 minutes. And with it, you can use it directly to share data, or you can build products or applications on top of the underlying data sharing. And we can host this platform in our secure data center, out in the cloud, or you can run your own copy in your own data center. And that's all I've got. Thank you for your time.